Today we are looking at the spot healing brush tool and how to do a content aware fill. So both of these methods involve sort of fixing blemishes, removing things from photos. So the things we're going to work on in this first example, this photo of a girl, we're going to fix this rip in the photograph down here, and we're going to fix some of the blemishes in her skin, try to sort of clear that up. First, I would like us to double the size of our canvas so that we can have two pictures of this girl side by side so we can kind of see our edits as we go. So in order to do that, there's two ways. We will need to unlock our background layer here so we can work with it. First way we could expand our canvas is with the crop tool over here. We can grab that. We can see, because our rulers are on, that this pixel is 600, or this image is 600 pixels across, so it'll need to be 1200, so I could just drag it out to 1200 like so. That works. It's a little less precise though because you're kind of just using your hand. So if I Command Z to undo that, I want to show you the other way you can change the size of your canvas. If you come up here to image, you can look for canvas size, and then it'll show us our width and our height. And if this was a weird number that was hard to do math with, one of the cool things you can do in this software, you can just say times 2, and it'll do the math for you. So if you needed to, you wanted to quadruple it, you wanted to divide by 2, and that works really in any of these places where you're inputting a number. You can just do the math right there. And so now I've got something that's 1200 pixels across. I can switch back to my move tool with V on my keyboard, move her over. I'm going to option click on her to make a copy. And now I should have two versions side by side. So we're going to use our spot healing brush tool, which is over here in our toolbar. It looks like a kind of like a band-aid. The shortcut for it is J, but keep in mind it might switch to one of these other tools that's also under the J shortcut. Now there's two ways that you can use this tool. You can use it destructively or non-destructively. Obviously we prefer non-destructively. The destructive option would just be to start using it right on that layer. And if we start using it, we can start taking away those spots. That's fine, but it's destructive because we've actually changed the pixels of this layer. And we don't want to do that. So I'm going to Command Z. Instead, I'm going to work in a new layer on top of this existing one. So at the bottom of my layers panel, I'm going to look for the little plus sign down here. Hit plus. Now I have a new layer. Now my spot healing brush tool will work just fine as long as I make sure in my options bar I have sample all layers turned on. This way Photoshop will look for pixels in all of the layers, not just the current layer that's selected, in which of course there are no pixels right now, so the tool wouldn't work. So now it works a lot like a paintbrush. You're just brushing over the spots. You can click on them, you can click and drag. I would make sure that your brush has a hardness that's at 50% or lower. If you have hardness at 100%, you have these sharp edges on your brush, and you might get results that don't look quite so good. Like if you zoom in on those, you might see it's not looking too bad, but sometimes I was doing this earlier and I could see spots that looked like a circle on her face, and I didn't like that. So as long as the hardness is lower, you shouldn't have an issue with that. So you can fix all of these areas. All right, that's looking pretty good. Another set of tools that I'm going to show you real quick for things that we can change is the dodge tool and the burn tool. So both the dodge tool looks like a little magnifying glass, burn tool looks like a little hand, shortcuts O, and these will either brighten or darken areas of an image. So I'm going to use the dodge tool to brighten parts of it. For this we are going to change the pixels, so we'll just be changing the pixels in her layer. I don't think you can do it non-destructively. And I'm just looking to lighten a few parts of maybe just this little area of her nose, just kind of brighten that up a little bit. Another thing I might do is put a splash of light in her eye like that. Not too much. There we go. And I think that's looking a lot better. Next thing we're going to do is take care of this rip down in the bottom of the photograph. For this, we're using the content aware fill. And if you think about the name, we're filling an area with pixels, and those pixels that Photoshop is going to generate are going to be generated based on the content that we tell Photoshop to look at. So the way that this works, we need to select the area that we're trying to fill. Because this is kind of a straight area, I'm just going to use the rectangular marquee tool for selecting a rectangular area. It works just by clicking and dragging. So that should work fine. Now, content aware fill lives under edit because it's a type of edit. So we're going to edit, scroll through this list for content aware fill. When we click on it, it's going to bring up this screen with some green highlighted stuff. What the green highlighted stuff shows is the areas that Photoshop is going to look at to generate pixels for this area. So this is the content that Photoshop is looking at. And it seems like based on the current selection, this is our preview over here on the right, and based on our current selection, I'd say it did a pretty good job. Sometimes though, you'll have to play with what is selected, like we will in the next example. So you can, your cursor defaults to a brush, I think with the minus selected, so you can kind of deselect certain areas. If you're getting bad results, you can play with what Photoshop has selected in order to generate those pixels. But this looks fine. We're going to output to a new layer. That's great. That means it'll be non-destructive. And then we can hit Command D to deselect. And I would say this photo looks a lot better than the original version. And there's, of course, more stuff we could do to it. But for now, that's a good little introduction to spot healing brush, content aware fill, and using a little dodge to brighten up some areas of the photo. In this photo, the photo of ducks, we're going to be removing this middle duck from the photo and trying to make it look realistic. So it's the same operation that we just used, selecting an area and then using content aware fill. We need to unlock our background layer. For this would be a good application to use what's called the lasso tool. This is a freehand selection tool. So when you click on it, it looks like a lasso, and you can just click and drag and draw you a little rough selection, right? This selection tool works because I don't need a super precise selection. I'm really just sort of circling the duck, and we're going to generate some pixels on top of him or her. So with our selection made, we'll come up here to Edit, Content Aware Fill, like we just did. And now this is where we might have to play with what is selected in green. And that's because if you'll notice, the photo is blurry at the top and it's blurry at the bottom, but it's not blurry in the middle. Right now, because Photoshop is sampling some of the blurry areas, it's putting blurred pixels in my selected area, and it's not looking very good. So let's deselect some of that blurry stuff on the top and the bottom. And okay, it's looking a little better, my preview. We still though might have a small problem, but that's no problem. We can fix it. So you'll notice now in my preview, I think I'm going to go with that. That looks fine. Command D to deselect. But there's a small problem, which is the very top part of this area that I just filled is currently not blurred. And the pixels right next to it are blurred. So to me, this kind of looks fake. It looks like something's going on. It looks like the photo's been edited. So let's see if we can put a little bit of a blur just in this top area of these new pixels that we just generated. So this is an application where we're going to use a filter. We're going to use a blur. But before we do that, we want to make sure we convert our layer for smart filters. So turn it into a smart object. So you can do that here under Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, or you can right click on your layer and say Convert to a Smart Object. Now, when I use a filter, I can change it after the fact and it's non-destructive, and I'll have a cool masking option. And that's really how this trick is going to work. So we're going to use a Gaussian blur. And I'm going to adjust the amount of blur so that it kind of matches the pixels right next to it. And it doesn't matter what it looks like down here because I'm going to mask the blur out of these areas in a second. So I would say, you know, something like that's too blurry. Say something like that looks pretty good. Now, you'll see where my smart filters are. Here's my Gaussian blur. Here is, it automatically made me a blank mask, which is pretty handy. So now if I select the mask and I hit B on my keyboard for brush and I make sure I have black selected over here. Remember, you can always hit X on your keyboard to toggle between black and white. Now what I'm doing, if I brush onto my mask here, I'm masking the blur. So if I just brush over the bottom half, I am masking that blur and taking it away from the areas that don't really need to be blurred. And if I really wanted to get fancy, I don't like this hard edge here. So if I really wanted to get fancy, I could take the opacity of my brush down, and that way I'll sort of only be half hiding the blur to make like a softer transition between the areas that are blurred and not blurred. So I think that is now looking pretty believable. Again, I still think this top little area is a little bit dark that we could brighten up. Again, if we wanted to be fancy, we could try to make another selection on that layer. Just this is the only real part that needs to be brightened up. And with that selection made, I'm going to use an adjustment layer called curves. And when I do this, the way curves work, the left hand of the graph represents dark pixels, the right hand represents light pixels. So if I were to click on this line like over here and drag down, what I'm doing is saying make the light pixels darker. I don't want to do that. If I was coming over here, these are dark pixels, I could click on them and say make the dark pixels even darker or make the dark pixels brighter. Really what I kind of want to do is just click, get these lighter pixels and just push them up a tiny bit so that it just kind of blends in with the surrounding pixels a little bit better. I think something like that is really all it needs. So now you can see, right, the little blur fix and the curves adjustment layer, they didn't do too much. It's not drastic changes, but it's just enough to kind of make our pixels that we generated look believable. So again, Photoshop will do a lot of the work for you, but sometimes you have to go in and fix stuff for it. And so you can also export this and submit it along with your girl side-by-side picture.